Landon Price wasn't expecting to meet a woman like her not, while trying to balance a used couch on his shoulder with a 4-year-old tugging at the back of his shirt. "Daddy, it's slipping," Rowan's small voice warned. "I got it, buddy, just," Landon adjusted the couch with a grunt, sweat beading down his neck in the sweltering June heat. "Need a hand?" a voice called out. He turned and nearly dropped the couch. The woman standing on the sidewalk wore jeans and a paint-splattered white tee, her dark auburn hair pulled into a messy bun, strands clinging to her face from the heat. She looked like she'd just finished a home renovation show and somehow made exhaustion look good. Yeah," Landon said, catching his breath. "You sure? It's heavier than it looks." "I've moved heavier," she said with a shrug, already moving toward the other end of the couch. Rowan blinked up at her. "You're strong," she laughed. "I try." They moved the couch together into the back of a rusty pickup parked by the curb. When they finished, she wiped her hands on her jeans and extended one. "Ember Sutton, Landon Price." He shook her hand, his grip firm, his palms still dusty from the couch. "This is my son, Rowan." Rowan gave a small wave. Ember knelt slightly to his level. "Nice to meet you, Rowan." Landon cleared his throat. "Thanks for the help. I wasn't planning on dragging a couch across half the block, but the guy who sold it to me didn't mention the 3 flights of stairs." "I've been there," Ember smiled. "Actually, would you mind helping me too? I just moved into the corner brownstone, and I've got a few boxes in the truck I can't carry alone." Landon hesitated. He was supposed to get Rowan back in time for dinner and find enough leftovers to make something halfway decent, but she had helped him. Rowan tugged on his hand. "We can help her, Daddy," Landon sighed. "All right, lead the way." They followed her to a white moving van parked a few houses down. The brownstone looked newly renovated, clean bricks, shiny windows, and a red door that gleamed like it had been painted yesterday. "This yours?" Landon asked, lifting a box labeled books. "Yeah, just bought it." He raised a brow. "Impressive, these go for a fortune," she shrugged. "I got lucky." They moved boxes together for the next half hour, Ember never slowing down, never asking for more than a steady hand. Rowan sat on the steps, sipping juice from the box she'd given him, drawing on a small pad she'd pulled from one of the boxes. "You live around here?" Ember asked, carrying a lamp inside. "Just 2 blocks down. I rent the basement of a duplex." "Me and Rowan? You do this full time?" She nodded toward the couch. Landon laughed. "No, I work construction, but I pick up furniture on the side, flip it, try to stretch things." She glanced at him. "That's smart." "I try," he said, echoing her earlier words, and she smiled again. By the time they finished, the sun had dipped low, casting warm gold over the front steps. Landon wiped his forehead, then noticed Rowan had fallen asleep against the railing. "I should get him home," Landon said softly, lifting his son into his arms. Ember nodded, her expression unreadable. "Thanks for helping." "No problem, you helped me first." He started down the steps. "Hey, Landon," she called after him. He turned. "Would you maybe come by this weekend? I could use help assembling some shelves. I'll pay you." He hesitated. "You don't need to pay me." She tilted her head. "Then let me buy you dinner, both of you." Rowan stirred in his arms and mumbled, "Pizza?" Ember grinned. "Deal." Landon smiled. "All right. Saturday?" Saturday. When Saturday came, Landon showed up with Rowan holding his hand and a toolbox in the other. Ember had changed. She wore a fitted black tank top and jeans, barefoot on hardwood floors. The brownstone interior was stunning, open layout, exposed brick, floor-to-ceiling windows. Rowan immediately took to the open space, running in circles. "Wow," Landon said, looking around. "I had a good designer," she said, brushing a hand down the wall. "And maybe a bit too much money." He raised a brow. "You said you got lucky. What do you do exactly?" "I invest," she said simply. "Startups, tech, real estate." Landon blinked. "You're an investor," she nodded. "So you're what, rich or something?" She met his eyes. "I'm a millionaire." He blinked again. "Like, really, really?" He let out a breath. "Well, now I feel underdressed," she laughed. "You're exactly as you should be." After he built the shelves, she ordered pizza, not just any pizza, but from a place that charged $20 for a small pie and didn't even deliver to his street. They ate on the back patio with string lights overhead and wine in glasses that cost more than his entire kitchen. "Why'd you help me that day?" he asked, watching Rowan nibble a slice. She looked at him, serious now. Because you looked like you needed it. And I liked that you didn't ask for it. Landon studied her. You don't seem like someone who needs help either. I don't, she said quietly, but it doesn't mean I don't want it sometimes. That night, when he carried Rowan home in his arms again, something in his chest felt different, lighter. She was beautiful, smart, and rich, and for some reason she'd invited him back again. Weeks passed, they built furniture, cooked lazy dinners, took Rowan to the park. Landon never asked for anything, always brought tools, always stayed polite. Ember stopped pretending she wasn't waiting for his text or his knock on the door one day. After Rowan fell asleep on the couch, Ember poured 2 glasses of wine and handed him one. You never ask me for anything, she said. I don't want anything from you. Everyone wants something from me. He looked at her, really looked at her. I just want to be around you. She stared at him, heart pounding. Then stay. He did. That night, for the first time, he kissed her. It was soft, unsure, but real. When she leaned into him, he cupped her face like she was breakable. Neither of them said anything after, but their eyes said more than enough. They were falling. Hard. The first time Landon saw Ember flinch, she was standing in her kitchen, stirring something on the stove while Rowan sat at the counter placing olives on his fingers like 10 tiny hats. The pot hissed, steam rising, and Ember's hand jerked back like she'd been burned though it hadn't touched anything. You okay? Landon asked, putting down the screwdriver he'd been using to fix a cabinet hinge. She blinked, then nodded too quickly. Fine. Just lost my focus. But her eyes had gone somewhere else, somewhere far away. He didn't push, not then. Instead, he helped her plate up the pasta, taught Rowan how to twirl spaghetti on a fork, and later carried his sleeping son upstairs to the guest room Ember had started calling his room like it had always belonged to him. After Rowan was down, Landon came back downstairs to find Ember on the balcony, barefoot, arms crossed, her hair loose for the first time since he'd met her. The city beyond glittered in the dusk like 1,000 secrets waiting to be told. He leaned against the railing beside her, quiet. You ever feel like you built the perfect life, she said, and then realized you were the only one in it? Her voice wasn't sad. It was matter of fact, like she was reciting a recipe she'd memorized years ago. I didn't build mine, Landon replied. I kind of patched it together with duct tape and stubbornness. She glanced at him, her mouth twitching not in amusement but recognition. That's still building, I guess. They stood there for a while, the hum of distant traffic below them, the scent of basil and garlic still lingering in the air. I was supposed to get married once, she said suddenly. Landon turned his head slowly. Yeah, she nodded. We were together 6 years. He was charming, brilliant, everyone adored him, especially investors. What happened? Her fingers tightened around the balcony rail. He took my money. Not just mine, other people's too. Disappeared with it. Left a hole in 3 companies and a bigger one in me. Landon didn't say anything for a long moment. Then quietly, that why you don't talk about work much, she exhaled, the air leaving her lungs like it had been held in too long. It's not just business anymore. It's proof that I'm not the fool they all thought I was. You're not. She looked at him, and for once there wasn't any guardedness in her eyes, just exhaustion and something like relief. You always believe people when they tell you who they are, she asked. I believe what they show me, he said. And what have I shown you? That you're strong and smart, and that you overcook pasta when you're distracted. She laughed, a real one this time, full and unexpected. Okay, fair. He reached for her hand, slow and certain. She didn't pull away. You don't have to prove anything to me, he said. The next morning, Ember made pancakes shaped like dinosaurs, and Rowan declared her the funniest grown-up ever. Landon watched the two of them giggling over syrup blobs and realized he hadn't heard his son laugh like that in months. Later that week, Ember showed up at the construction site where Landon worked. She wore a navy trench coat and oversized sunglasses, looking completely out of place among the sawdust and scaffolding. But she didn't seem to care. You're early, Landon said, wiping his hands on his jeans. I brought lunch, he blinked. You brought lunch here. She held up a bag from a sandwich shop he'd only ever seen on billboards. I figured you'd never take me up on the offer if I waited for you to be free. He glanced at the guys around him, who were now pretending not to stare. You're gonna be the talk of the site for weeks. Let them talk. They sat on the back of his truck, eating sandwiches and drinking bottled lemonade. She asked about the project he was working on, listening intently as he explained how they were reinforcing the foundation of an old theater that had been converted into a community center. You ever think about starting your own crew? She asked. He looked up. What? You've got the skills. The experience. You could build your own business. He shook his head. Hard to do that when every dollar goes to rent and soccer cleats. She didn't push, but he saw something flicker in her expression, an idea forming. That weekend, she invited Landon and Rowan to an art exhibit. It's interactive, she promised. Rowan won't be bored. He wasn't. There were light tunnels and sound sculptures and a room full of giant floating orbs that changed color when you touched them. Ember held Landon's hand the entire time, never once letting go. After they walked along the riverside path, Rowan chasing pigeons ahead of them. You're good with him, Landon said. I like kids. You ever want any of your own? She hesitated. I used to. I thought I'd have them by now. What changed? I stopped trusting myself to pick the right people. He stopped walking. You picked me. She turned toward him, startled. I didn't say it was a mistake, she replied. Then what are we doing? Her eyes darted to where Rowan stood, arms outstretched, trying to make the pigeons fly again. I don't know, she whispered, but I want to keep doing it. He stepped closer. So do I. They kissed again, right there on the path, the city fading behind them and only the river and the boy and the two of them still in motion. That night, Ember sat in bed long after Landon had left, scrolling through emails she hadn't opened in weeks. One was from her lawyer. The house in Aspen had finally sold, another from her accountant. Your discretionary account now exceeds $8 million, and one from her ex-fiancé. She deleted it without reading, then she opened a blank message, but instead of typing, she closed her laptop. Some things were better said in person. The invitation arrived the old-fashioned way on heavy cardstock, hand-delivered by a courier wearing a blazer far too formal for Landon's porch. He stared at the cream envelope, embossed in gold, unsure whether to laugh or shred it. Inside, it read, You are cordially invited to the Camden Foundation Gala Saturday at 7 o'clock, the Marquette Hotel. Grand ballroom formal attire at the bottom, in looping script. +1 bring Rowan. Landon turned it over 3 times, then looked down at the small note tucked behind it. Don't say no, I bought you a tie. Rowan peeked over his arm. What's a gala? Landon rubbed the back of his neck. I think it's a party where people don't spill juice on themselves. Rowan blinked. Then why are we going? That night, Landon called Ember from the kitchen, Rowan asleep upstairs. You sure about this? I wouldn't have sent the invitation if I wasn't, she said. Besides, they serve mini cheeseburgers in martini glasses. Rowan will love it. He hesitated. I don't own anything formal. I sent something to your place. It should arrive tomorrow. He opened his mouth, but she cut in gently. Trust me. When Saturday came, the suit waiting on his doorstep was tailored so precisely it fit like it had been stitched onto him. Black, sleek, and subtle. The tie was navy with a faint gold thread woven through. Even Rowan had a little vest and slacks, his curls combed into place with more effort than Landon cared to admit. They arrived by car service Ember had arranged, a sleek silver sedan with leather seats and a driver who knew both their names. The Marquette was all glass and gold trim, the kind of building Landon had passed 100 times but never stepped inside. As they entered, chandeliers bathed the room in warm light, and the buzz of laughter and champagne glasses drifted across polished marble floors. Ember stood at the top of the stairs, wearing a midnight blue gown that caught the light with every breath she took. Her hair was swept up, a single curl falling near her cheek, and when she saw them, her face lit up not with surprise but with something softer. Certain. You clean up well, she said as they reached her. Landon glanced down at himself. I look like someone who stole real clothes. You look like someone who belongs here. Rowan tugged on her hand. You look like a star. Her eyes softened. Thanks, buddy. The night unfolded with an ease Landon hadn't expected. Waiters glided through the crowd with silver trays, and Ember never left his side. She introduced him not by occupation. but by name never flinching when someone raised an eyebrow at his calloused hands or the way he stood back, observing instead of mingling. At one point, a man in a gray tuxedo approached, his smile too polished. "Ember, didn't expect to see you here this year." "I never missed the foundation dinner, Grant," she replied coolly. Grant's eyes flicked to Landon. "And this is my guest." Landon extended a hand. "Landon Price." Grant shook it, then turned back to Ember. "Still investing in passion projects." Ember's spine straightened. "Still writing off wine bars as tech ventures." Grant's grin tightened. "Touché." The moment passed, but Landon could feel the tension in her grip as she took his arm and led him toward the balcony. "Friend of yours?" he asked once they were outside. "Ex-colleague. He thinks anyone who doesn't work for Goldman is playing dress-up." Landon looked back toward the ballroom. "They all think that. Some. But not all of them matter." They stood in silence for a moment, the city sprawling beneath them, lights blinking like a rhythm only Ember could hear. Then she turned to him. "Do you know why I invited you here?" He met her gaze. "To make your ex-colleague uncomfortable," she laughed, but it faded quickly. "No, I wanted you to see this part of my life. You didn't need to prove anything. It's not about proving, it's about sharing." Landon studied her, the vulnerability beneath her elegance. "You sure you want me in that part?" "I'm already in yours," she said softly. "I didn't ask, I just showed up." He reached for her hand. "You were the best surprise I've had in years." Inside, the foundation's director took the stage and people began drifting toward their seats. Ember hesitated. "There's something else." Landon waited. "I bought the building on your street." He blinked. "You what?" "The duplex, and the 3 next to it." "Why?" "I want to renovate them. Offer below market rent to single parents and families trying to get back on their feet. You told me about Mrs. Dorsey upstairs, how she's about to be priced out. I can't fix everything, but I can start there." Landon stared at her. "You did all that, quietly?" "It's not about being seen." He shook his head, stunned. "You're something else, Ember." She looked down. "Is that a good thing?" "It is now," he said, then kissed her lightly, but with a promise that made the city blur behind them. Later, as the gala wound down, Rowan fell asleep in Ember's lap, his tiny tucks wrinkled, his head nestled against her arm. Landon reached for him, but she held up a hand. "Let me." She carried him to the car herself carefully, like he was the most precious thing she owned, and Landon watched, heart full, realizing he hadn't just fallen for her. He was already in love. Rain drummed steadily on the windows of Ember's brownstone, softening the sounds of the city and cloaking the early evening in a kind of quiet that felt like it belonged only to them. Landon stood in the kitchen, sleeves rolled to his elbows, drying a dish while Rowan sat curled up in the living room, a blanket tucked under his chin as a movie played. Ember leaned against the counter nearby, barefoot on the tile, tapping a spoon against the rim of her mug. "I've been thinking," she said, not looking at him. Landon glanced up. "That's usually where the trouble starts." She gave a small laugh, but her eyes were serious. "I don't want this to be temporary." He turned to face her fully. "It hasn't felt temporary for a while. I know." She set the spoon down. "But I also know it's easier to fall into something than it is to build it properly. I've fallen before. This time I want to build." He crossed the space between them, drying towel forgotten on the counter. "So let's build." She studied him. "Even if it means changing everything." "I already have," he said simply. "Every plan I made before I met you is different now." She looked down at the floor, then back at him. "I'm opening an office for the Housing Initiative. I want you to run it." His brow furrowed. "You mean like help with construction?" "I mean help design it, manage it, build the team. You've worked every inch of that neighborhood and you know what people actually need." "I have money, but I need someone who knows how to make it matter." He stared at her, unsure if he'd heard right. "You want me to run it? I trust you more than anyone else." He shook his head slowly. "I didn't go to college. I don't have some fancy title. You're the one who fixes things when they're broken. That's more valuable than 10 degrees. He let out a breath, the weight of her belief pressing against something in his chest he hadn't realized was still fragile. "I'll do it," he said. "But not because I want to prove anything. I'll do it because you believe I can." She stepped into him then, hands resting lightly on his chest. "I believe in a lot more than that." They didn't kiss then. They didn't need to. The silence held more than words could. Later that week, Ember picked Rowan up from school for the first time. Landon had been caught in a meeting about the project, and she'd offered before he could ask. When he walked into the brownstone that evening, he found the two of them at the dining table, a sheet of paper between them and colored pencils scattered like confetti. "Who's this?" Landon asked, looking at the drawing. Rowan beamed. "It's our new house." Ember said maybe we could all live together one day. Landon's heart stuttered in his chest. He met Ember's eyes across the table. She didn't look away. That night, after Rowan had gone to bed and the house had quieted, Ember stood beside Landon on the balcony, the city stretching dark and endless beyond them. "I keep wondering when this is going to feel like too much," she said. "Like I'll wake up and realize it was a dream I let myself want too badly." Landon reached for her hand. "It's not a dream, and if it ever feels like too much, we'll handle it, together." She turned her face toward him, rain misting softly against her cheek. "Then move in," he blinked. "Are you serious?" "I've been serious since the second night you showed up with a toolbox and no idea how much the shelves cost." He laughed, then held her face gently. "You sure about this?" "I've never been more sure of anything." The next morning, Landon packed the essentials: Rowan's books and toys, a few worn jackets, the photo of his parents he kept on the nightstand, and moved them into the brownstone. Ember had already cleared drawers. She'd already made space. Days turned into weeks. The project took shape. Landon met with architects and city officials, balancing phone calls with bedtime stories. Ember stood beside him at every meeting, letting him lead, letting him become something bigger than either of them had expected. They didn't talk about love in the way people usually did. It wasn't whispered in candlelight or shouted during arguments. It was in the way she handed him coffee before he asked, in the way he remembered to buy her favorite cereal, in how Rowan woke up each morning with both of them there, steady and certain. One afternoon, as spring began to warm the city, Ember stood outside the first renovated building, hand in hand with Landon as tenants moved in. Families, women with babies on their hips, kids carrying backpacks 2 sizes too big. "You did this," she said quietly. "We did this." "No, Landon," she turned to him. "You made something real. You didn't just change lives, you changed mine." He looked at her, heart full. "Then let me ask you something." She tilted her head. "What?" He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a small velvet box, and opened it. The ring inside was simple, elegant, timeless. Ember's breath caught. "I want to build every part of my life with you," he said. "Will you marry me?" She didn't hesitate. "Yes." He slid the ring on her finger, and when she kissed him, the city roared beneath their feet, but nothing else existed beyond the space between their hearts. That weekend, they married in the garden behind the brownstone. Just close friends, strings of lights, and Rowan carrying the rings with both hands like they were treasure. Ember wore a dress that caught the wind. Landon wore the suit she'd once sent him, and when they said their vows, there were no grand metaphors. Just promises they meant with every piece of themselves. Afterward, Rowan fell asleep in Ember's arms again, just like he had that first night at the gala. Landon looked at them, his son, his wife, his home, and realized the struggle had brought him to something extraordinary. He'd helped her move a couch. She'd moved his entire world. The sun filtered through the tall garden windows of the brownstone, casting soft, warm light onto the breakfast table. Ember sat with her knees tucked up on the bench, a pen loosely held between her fingers and a legal pad full of scrawled notes balanced on her lap. She wasn't working, not really, at least, not in the way she used to. Her world had shifted. She no longer measured her days in stock indexes or investor calls, but in school pickups, community meetings, and the slow, steady rhythm of building a life with Landon. Landon entered the kitchen, still damp from the shower, towel slung around his neck, shirt half-buttoned. He moved with a quiet kind of confidence now, one that came not from financial standing, but from purpose. His mornings weren't rushed anymore. He no longer had to squeeze in breakfast between job sites or worry about counting every dollar. The foundation project had taken off faster than either of them anticipated. The waiting list for the next phase had grown by the week. "You're not dressed," he said, pouring coffee into a travel mug. "I'm thinking," Ember replied, tapping her pen against the page. Landon leaned over and kissed her cheek. Dangerous, she grinned. I've been sketching ideas for the North Lot. I think we could add a family resource center, something with childcare and job training, maybe even a therapy wing. You planning to run a whole city block now? No. Just dreaming a little bigger. He lowered himself beside her, resting his elbow on the table. Then dream, I'll build it. A knock sounded at the door. Ember glanced at the clock. That should be the notary. Landon stood. I thought they were coming tomorrow. They moved it up. Said they had a cancellation. He opened the door and stepped aside as a woman in a navy blazer entered, briefcase in hand. She was followed by a tall man with a soft smile and a clipboard. Living trust and joint ownership documents, Ember explained, standing now, smoothing her shirt. I wanted everything sorted, just in case. Landon looked at her. You didn't have to do this. I wanted to. This house is yours as much as mine, and if I'm going to keep building this thing with you, I want the foundation solid. He reached for her hand and gave it a quiet squeeze. Then let's sign. Rowan came downstairs a few minutes later, hair tousled, dragging his blanket behind him. He blinked at the strangers in the kitchen, then yawned. Why are there people here? Ember crouched beside him. We're just taking care of some grown-up things. Want to help me make pancakes after? He nodded and climbed into her lap, curling into her side like it was the only place he belonged. After the papers were signed and the notary left, the house felt even warmer. Quieter, more like theirs. That afternoon, Ember and Landon sat side by side in the back room of the newly opened resource center, watching as a woman in her 20s read aloud to a group of toddlers. The room smelled faintly of fresh paint and books, and the soft hum of children's laughter filtered through the air. She used to live in her car, Ember murmured, gesturing toward the young woman. Now she's on track to finish her teaching certificate. Landon nodded, eyes never leaving the scene. You gave her a second chance. We did. They returned home just as the rain started. It came in light waves, slicking the sidewalks and blurring the lights of passing cars. Inside, Rowan had built a fort from couch cushions and demanded they enter only after saying the secret password, which changed every 10 minutes. Later, as the rain deepened and thunder rumbled in the distance, Ember stood by the window in the bedroom, robe tied loosely at her waist. Landon stood behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pressing his chin against her shoulder. Do you miss it? He asked quietly. The boardrooms, the deals, the chase. I thought I would, she admitted. But no, this is the first time I've ever felt like what I'm doing actually matters. He kissed the side of her neck, slow and deliberate. It does. She turned in his arms, and you miss the quiet, he smiled. I've never had this kind of noise before, the good kind, the kind that fills your life instead of draining it. They didn't make love that night in the usual rush of passion. Instead, it was slow, reverent. A conversation between two bodies that had already said everything and still had more to give. Weeks passed. Landon hired 2 men he'd once worked alongside to help manage the construction teams. Ember partnered with a local university to offer internships for students interested in nonprofit work. Rowan started soccer again and insisted Landon coach, even though he'd never played a day in his life. One Sunday morning, Ember opened the front door to find a small, square package on the stoop. No label, no note. Inside was a hand-bound book. The cover was embossed with the title, The Price of Home. She flipped it open to find pages filled with photos, candid shots of the housing project, families smiling, children on playgrounds, before and after images of the buildings. At the back was a quote handwritten in neat, blocky letters. Sometimes the richest people are the ones who build something no one can ever take away. She pressed a hand to her mouth, eyes shining. That night after dinner, she handed the book to Landon. He turned the pages slowly, then looked up at her. Who made this? I don't know. One of the residents, maybe. It was left on the porch. He flipped back to the cover. The Price of Home. They named it after you, he laughed softly. That's a first. She took the book from his hands and set it gently on the coffee table, then curled into his side as Rowan snored softly on the other couch, his face pressed into a pillow shaped like a lion. You know what I think, she whispered. What? I think this is the life I was always supposed to find. I just didn't know how to get here. You got here, he murmured, kissing the top of her head. And now you're not going anywhere. I'm not, she said, eyes closing. Not ever, and she didn't. They built the rest of their lives the same way they'd built everything else together. With calloused hands and open hearts, with late nights and early mornings, with laughter and honesty, and the kind of love that doesn't ask to be proven because it's already known. They didn't need a mansion or a private island, they had each other. And that was everything.